I've been hiking solo for about 6 years now, long enough that the silence doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels lived in, familiar. I got used to stepping off the main trails, following faint game paths and old logging roads until the signs disappeared behind me. That comfort is exactly what got me into trouble. This happened last October in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. It was one of those gray, overcast days where the sky looks like it's holding its breath, mid-50 seconds if I had to guess. Perfect hiking weather. I drove up from Virginia for a long weekend, planning to hit some of the more remote sections that didn't see much traffic. I told myself I was looking for solitude, but really I was just tired of people. Texts, emails, meetings. I wanted woods that didn't know my name. The first few hours were peaceful. The official trail faded into a narrow track, then into something that was probably just deer movement through the underbrush. I kept going. Sometimes I'd see little stacks of stones, careless cairns piled on flat rocks. I figured other hikers had been here before me, but the more I saw them, the more they felt intentional. Some were arranged in thin, wobbling columns, 3 stones up, with a 4th laid sideways on top like a little bar. I remember thinking they looked almost like symbols, not waypoints. About 4 hours in, I reached what I can only describe as a gorge. It wasn't enormous, but it was deep, 30 or 40 feet down, to a rocky bottom where a thin creek threaded its way between boulders. It wasn't a guaranteed death if you fell, but you'd break something badly, and the walls were a mess of loose shale and overhang. Climbing down and back up wasn't an option. What made it crossable was the tree. A massive oak had fallen at some point, spanning the gap perfectly. It was wedged at a slight angle between both sides, the bark worn smooth from weather, and from the looks of it, other people using it as a natural bridge. It was thick enough that I didn't have to walk on a tightrope, but narrow enough that one bad misstep would send you over. I stood there for a minute, testing the trunk with my foot, bouncing a little. It felt solid, no creaks, no alarming shifts. My watch flickered when I checked at 3:17 p.m., then just 3, for a second before the numbers snapped back into place. I shrugged it off as a glitch. I started across. I took it slow, placing each boot carefully, eyes locked on the opposite bank. The drop below tugged at my peripheral vision, that weird vertigo you get when your brain keeps asking, what if? My heart was pounding by the time my boots hit solid ground on the far side. I stepped off the log, exhaled, and felt a surge of adrenaline that made me want to laugh. I'd done it. Just me, the woods, and a little balancing act. That's when I heard it. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It took my brain a second to register what I was hearing. A heavy, rhythmic impact echoing from behind me. I turned back toward the gorge, expecting maybe to see a woodpecker or a dead branch dropping. Instead, I saw him. He was standing on the opposite bank, about 10 feet from where the tree met the ground. Older, definitely in his 50s.
Stop!
Ratty camo jacket, old jeans, work boots. A scraggly beard, gray threaded through dark hair, made him look like some stereotypical lumberjack you'd see in a gas station calendar that nobody bought. For a moment, I was just surprised to see anyone at all that deep in the woods. Then, I saw what he was holding. An axe. A full-size axe, the kind meant for splitting real logs, not decorative campfire sticks. He didn't acknowledge me. He walked straight up to the base of the fallen oak and, without a word, swung the axe into it. Thunk. The sound vibrated down the length of the log and into my boots. I stared for a second, not fully understanding what I was seeing. "Hey!" I shouted across the gorge. "What are you doing?" He didn't look up. He just swung again, burying the blade a little deeper into the wood. Thunk. I felt the tree shudder. A cold, sharp realization slid into my stomach. I had just walked across that log. My footprints were still visible in the smoother strip of bark. This wasn't some random dead tree he'd chosen. He was cutting the bridge I'd used. "Hey!" I yelled again, louder this time. "Knock it off, I need that to get back." No reaction, no eye contact, just that smooth, unhurried swing, like he was doing chores. I watched another chip fly off, and the edge on his side start to splinter, small cracks spiderwebbing into the trunk. I just crossed that. I screamed, my voice bouncing off the rock walls. "I'm still over here." Nothing. He just kept going. Anger flared up hard and fast, fueled by fear. I started yelling whatever came into my head. Insults, curses, threats. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I know it wasn't smart. Something I spat out must have landed, though, because he stopped mid-swing. The axe head hung in the air for a second before he let it fall, the blade biting into the bark and staying there. Slowly, he straightened and stepped closer to the edge of the gorge. He bent a little at the waist, peering across at me. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. His eyes were wrong. They were sunken, ringed in dark, bruised-looking skin that seemed almost burned in, like he hadn't slept in years. The irises were a flat, washed-out color. I couldn't pin down gray, maybe, or very light brown. There was a small piece of rusted metal hanging from a cord around his neck, a twisted circle intersected by a jagged line. I'd already seen something like it scratched into trees earlier. I just didn't realize it yet. "That's not my problem," he called back. The casualness of it wasn't even hostile, just dismissive, made my rage evaporate and left something colder behind. He might as well have said the weather was fine. I stared at him, waiting for him to clarify, to smirk, to say he was joking. He didn't. We just looked at each other across that 30-foot drop. Then he leaned a little closer, and his lips pulled into something that wasn't exactly a smile. "I know these woods a lot better than you do," he said. The tone scared me more than the words. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact, like he was telling me the time or his own name. My skin prickled. I suddenly had the unnerving sense that I wasn't just dealing with some random crazy guy in the middle of nowhere. This was his place, his rules. We held eye contact for what felt like a full minute. Then he reached down, ripped the axe handle, yanked it free, turned his back on me, and walked calmly into the trees until the camo jacket blended with the trunks, and he was gone. I stood there shaking, listening for the sound of his footsteps. There was nothing. No birds, no wind, just the dull roar of blood in my ears. The log was still there, still spanning the gorge. From a distance, it didn't look too bad, but I could see where the wood on his side was chewed up and cracked, fibers torn loose like frayed rope. The cut wasn't deep enough to sever it completely, but it didn't need to be. All it needed was to fail once. I thought about trying to cross back. The idea of being stuck on the wrong side of that gorge with no cell service and no idea of another crossing made my throat tighten. I pulled my phone out anyway. 0 bars. No map, no call, nothing. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Okay, just follow the creek. There has to be another way." I started downstream, keeping the gorge to my left. At first it felt like a reasonable plan. Water always goes somewhere. The creek would eventually widen or shallow out. I'd find a narrow spot, a cluster of rocks, something. An hour later, the walls were higher. The slope on my side became a steep incline of loose rock and roots. The opposite bank climbed too, the gap between them widening. Every turn I rounded, expecting a break, just opened into more of the same. The creek carved deeper, a dark line in the bottom of a stone throat. The sky behind the clouds had dimmed. Shadows stretched long between the trees. That's when I found the campsite. It was in a small clearing, a flat space where someone had scraped leaves away to bare dirt. In the center, stones were arranged into a fire ring, but not a normal one.
Hello?
The rocks were stacked into small towers, balanced delicately on top of each other. There were no fresh ashes, no charred wood, but bits of blackened something clung to the stone. At first I was relieved. Other people, maybe someone with a radio, or at least a better idea of the area. Then I started seeing the details. The surrounding trees were carved, not with initials or hearts or dates, but with deep gouges forming rough circles intersected by straight slashes. Over and over, at shoulder height and higher, as if someone had dragged metal through bark with deliberate force. Hanging from branches were bits of rusted tools handles snapped off, heads twisted, blades bent, and strips of cloth tied into knots. Near one tree, bones had been arranged into a careful spiral on the ground. The charm around the axeman's neck flashed in my mind. Same shape, same intersecting circle. Every hair on my arms stood up. I backed away, heart pounding twice as fast now, and turned to leave the clearing. That's when I heard it behind me. Footsteps. Not loud, not crashing through brush, but a measured crunch of leaves and twigs. Not an animal. Too slow, too intentional. I spun around. The sound stopped instantly. "Hello?" I called, hating the way my voice warbled. "I know you're there." Silence. I swallowed and kept moving, angling away from the campsite, keeping the gorge to my left like a lifeline. After a minute, the footsteps came again behind, and a little to my right now, matching my pace. When I stopped, they stopped. I picked up speed. So did they. I don't know how long it went on like that. The trees started thinning in places, then crowding back in. Every time I risked a glance over my shoulder, I saw nothing until I did. Just for a fraction of a second, I caught a shape ducking behind a trunk. Human height, human outline, maybe 20-30 yards back. My first thought was that it was the Axeman. Then I saw another figure, further to the left, slipping behind another tree. They were fanning out. They weren't trying to scare me off. They were trying to push me somewhere. Panic shredded what was left of my judgment. I ran. Branches whipped my arms, scratched my face. The gorge remained a dark smear to my left. It dropped just out of sight. The footsteps behind me broke into a chaotic rush now. No more pretending to be subtle. Someone shouted, just a wordless scream, raw and ragged like a war cry. It tore through the trees and into my spine. I don't remember deciding to run toward the log. I just remember seeing it, another fallen tree bridging the gorge up ahead, smaller than the first one, thinner and angled, but still my only option. Without thinking, I sprinted straight for it. I didn't test it. I didn't slow down. I vaulted onto it and started across, arms out, boots scrambling for purchase on damp, moss-covered bark. The world narrowed to the trunk under my feet and the void on either side. Halfway across, the tree shifted with a subtle, sickening lurch. I bit back a scream and kept going. It held. I jumped the last 2 feet to the far bank and spun around, chest heaving. 3 figures stood on the opposite side, just beyond the edge. All of them were filthy. All of them wore some variation of that camo and denim uniform. One held a length of rusted pipe. Another's hand rested on an axe. Around each of their necks, I saw metal charms catching the failing light. The leading man stepped forward, placed his hand lightly on the trunk like he was about to test it, and then stepped back again. None of them crossed. They just stared at me. For a moment, my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, breathing hard, caught in that stare. The sky above them looked darker than it should have, like a storm cloud had gathered just over their side. "Get the hell out of here," the man with the axe called. "You got lucky." That snapped whatever spell I was under. I ran. I didn't hear them follow. The forest went unnaturally quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. At some point, through sheer blind luck, or some angle I took in my panic, I stumbled back onto a real trail-worn dirt, a familiar blaze on a trunk. I followed it, half running, until the trees thinned, and the trailhead appeared like a hallucination. My car was still there, alone in the gravel lot. I drove home that night with both hands shaking on the wheel. I did report it, in my own halting way. I called and explained what happened, left out the symbols and bone spirals, and just said, some men with weapons had harassed me, tried to strand me. The voice on the other end sounded tired. They took my name, thanked me, and said they'd look into it. I knew they wouldn't find anything.
Get the hell out
Months
of here.
later, I finally worked up the nerve to go on
lucky.
another solo hike. Different forest, different state. When I got back to my car, there was something hanging from the rear wiper blade. A small figure made of twigs bound together with rusted wire. The branches crossed into a familiar shape, a crude circle, intersected by a jagged line. My watch said 3:17. I haven't gone off trail since. I've always told people that the wilderness makes more sense to me than cities do. Out here, things are honest. If something's dangerous, it doesn't pretend otherwise. Wolves act like wolves. Weather warns you before it hits. Trees groan when they're about to fall. Nature plays by rules, even the brutal ones. At least, that's what I believed. 3 years ago, northern Minnesota proved me wrong. I'd gone off trail on purpose. That was my preferred way to hike, leave the beaten paths behind. Wander through the quiet places where the air feels older, and the sunlight filters down in narrow, careful beams. It was a crisp afternoon, and everything seemed normal. I wasn't in any real danger at first. I had daylight, water, a compass, and the confidence of someone who slipped out of the grid more times than he can count. But at some point, without me realizing it, the forest shifted around me. Landmarks I'd been following disappeared. A ridge that should have been on my right was suddenly nowhere to be seen. A low rise I'd passed earlier was behind me again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was subtle, the kind of disorientation that creeps in at the edges. Just enough to make me stop and turn around, squinting at trees I somehow didn't recognize. It's fine, I told myself out loud. This happens sometimes. I wasn't panicking yet, but I wasn't okay either. I kept moving anyway, convinced I'd turn a corner and see something familiar. Instead, I heard rustling behind me. At first it was nothing, a small crunch, a shifting of leaves. But it came again, about 30 seconds later. Same distance. Same rhythm. I'd walk a bit, and there it was again. Not constant movement, not an animal rooting around, just something matching my pace like it was tethered to me. I stopped walking. Silence. I started again. Rustle. Probably a deer, I muttered, knowing it wasn't. Deer don't track you like that. They spook easily. They run. They don't shadow step behind you like a polite stalker. My hand went to the handle of my knife. I didn't draw it yet, but the weight of it grounded me. I told myself I'd stay calm, that everything had a rational explanation. That lie didn't last long. The rustling suddenly multiplied. Not behind me, around me. Branches swayed to my left, leaves crunched to my right. Something darted in front of me. I froze, heart thundering. My brain shuffled through every possible scenario. Bears, cougars, coyotes, but none of it made sense. Then I saw them. Wolves. 6 of them, maybe 7. They materialized from between the trees, like smoke taking shape. Gray coats, hackles raised, eyes fixed on me with a hunger that wasn't confused or curious. They weren't passing through. They weren't defending territory. They had encircled me with precision, each one positioned in a near-perfect ring. I'd always respected wolves, admired them even, but admiration evaporates the second you're standing in the middle of a circle they formed around your throat. My instincts screamed at me to run. Logic screamed louder. Running meant dying tired, so I drew my knife and tried to make myself look big, praying my hands wouldn't shake. One wolf let out a low growl, lips peeling back. Another inched forward, shoulders rolling in a slow predatory motion. I felt myself shrinking inside my own body. This was it. I genuinely thought, I am going to die here. Then everything changed. Every wolf froze. At the exact same moment, their ears snapped upward in eerie unison. Their heads turned toward a point behind me, the same point. Not one wolf reacted to another's movement. They reacted to something else. Something I hadn't heard. Something I hadn't seen. And then they ran. Not slinked away. Not retreated cautiously. They bolted. Full sprint, crashing through the underbrush with a level of panic that made the hair on my arms rise. Wolves don't panic. They don't run blind. But they fled like something enormous had been dropped into the center of the earth behind me. Suddenly, I was alone. The silence that followed wasn't natural. No wind, no birds, no insects. The forest felt like a vacuum. Like the air itself had stepped out of the world and left me behind. The light dimmed, even though the sky hadn't changed. You know that moment when you're about to faint and the edges of your vision deepen? That's what it felt like. Not in my head, but in the forest around me. My skin prickled. Wolves had run from something behind me, something close enough to terrify them. I didn't want to turn around, but I did. Nothing. Only trees, angled trunks, a patch of shadow that looked a little too thick. My mind cycled through explanations. Maybe a bigger predator? A bear? But bears don't walk in absolute silence. And there wasn't a single broken twig, no sound of breath, just stillness. I forced myself to move, forward, the direction I thought would take me out of the woods. Every step felt like walking through static, like my nerves were tuned to a frequency just sharp enough to hurt. About 20 minutes later, I saw a clearing up ahead. My relief lasted maybe a second, because as soon as I stepped into view, I understood what the wolves had been reacting to. The clearing wasn't natural. It wasn't a campsite. It was arranged. Patterns had been carved into the trees surrounding it, deep intersecting circles marked by slashes. Some fresh, some older, all deliberate. Hanging from branches were bone charms, twisted wire, things made from rusted metal and knotted twine. A few of the bones were small and bird-like. Others looked longer. Human? I couldn't tell. In the center was a ring of stones stacked, not placed. Little pillars leaning on each other like a miniature city. Inside the circle were scraps of cloth, pieces of jewelry, bits of something blackened. But the worst part was the smoke. A thick black column hung about 6 feet in the air, not rising from the fire ring, not dispersing, not moving, just hovering there like a vertical pool of oil. The edges shimmered faintly, as if reflecting something behind it, something I couldn't quite see directly. I stared at it, unable to look away. My eyes burned, but I couldn't blink. It felt like watching a window instead of a thing. Like I was looking through it, but at what, I didn't know. Then came the feeling. Not fear, not dread, grief. A heavy, choking grief that didn't belong to any memory I had. Like mourning for something that hadn't happened yet. Something that was gonna happen. All my muscles tightened. My stomach turned. My throat locked. I tried to take a step back. My body didn't move. My watch buzzed. I looked down. 3:17 p.m. It blinked, scrambled, then read 3:17 a.m., then 6:44 p.m. I don't remember deciding to run. One moment I was staring at the smoke, the next I was crashing through the trees. My mind went blank, like someone had cut out entire moments. When my memory snapped back, it was dark, fully dark. I was drenched in sweat but freezing. The forest felt different, wrong. Like the shapes of the trees didn't match the ones I'd been passing earlier. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, always gone when I turned. I stumbled out of the woods near my car, heart racing so hard I thought it might burst. I got in, locked the doors, and drove without turning on the radio, not wanting to hear anything except the engine. I didn't report it. Not officially. What would I even say? There was smoke that didn't move? Wolves ran from something invisible? I lost time? I just went home. I still hike. But sometimes, when the wind is too still or the trees go quiet all at once, I catch myself listening for rustling behind me, every 30 seconds. And every once in a while, without meaning to, I glance at my watch, just to make sure it's not 3:17. Back when I was 18, the world felt safe in a way I can't even relate to anymore. Back then, danger was the kind of thing you joked about. Bears, meth heads, mountain lions, all just stories you threw around at campfires to freak each other out. When you're 18, the woods feel like a playground. Not a place that watches you, not a place that waits. It was February, senior year of high school. Me, my girlfriend Megan, my buddy Colin, and his girlfriend Anne had planned a weekend camping trip to the Ozarks. Our parents trusted us maybe too much, and my dad even let me borrow his Taurus G2C for protection. He said it with a smirk, like he was humoring me. I didn't care. It felt badass. We drove 9 hours, rolling into Arkansas just before dark. The air was cold enough that your breath hung like smoke. We set up camp at one of the designated sites, not deep wilderness yet, just a place to crash overnight. Nothing weird happened that first night. We were laughing, eating junk food, hyping up the falls we were going to see the next day. Morning came bright and cold. We cooked breakfast, packed up, and hit the trail planning to reach a waterfall by midday, and then hike further to set up a more secluded campsite. Anne was the first to say something was off. About an hour into the hike, she stopped dead and said, "There's a man in the trees. He's been staring at me." We all froze. Megan looked too, squinting through the bare winter branches. Colin puffed himself up, probably trying to look impressive. I scanned the forest, but didn't see anything. Then, the man moved. He didn't walk away. He ran, fast and low, like an animal cutting through the underbrush. Colin shouted something like, "Keep walking, freak!" But the guy disappeared quickly. We tried to shrug it off. Probably some hunter or drifter. Not every weirdo in the woods is a threat, right? But then maybe 30 minutes later we saw her. We were approaching a section of trail that curved along a ridge, when Megan grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my coat. What the look? A woman stood between two trees on the opposite slope. Calling her tall doesn't cover it. She was towering 6'5", maybe taller, with limbs too long for her frame and a posture that was completely rigid. Her clothes weren't right either, something like a faded dress or a long shirt layered under a coat that didn't fit her shoulders. Her hair hung stringy and dark, covering part of her face. She wasn't moving, she was just staring. The four of us froze. "Hey!" Colin shouted, trying but failing to hide the shake in his voice. "Back off, we're armed." The woman didn't flinch. Didn't blink. After several seconds, she turned slow, mechanical, and walked away behind a cluster of dead pines. We didn't speak for a long moment. Then Colin muttered, "Yeah, okay. We're hiking further." We didn't argue. When we finally reached the waterfall, we pretended everything was normal. We took photos, ate sandwiches, tried to laugh, but none of us wanted to stick around. By late afternoon, we found a flat area beside a creek to set up our tents. It had a deeper pool in the middle where you could actually sit in the water. We tried to unwind. We swam in the freezing creek until our skin prickled. We cooked a big dinner, chicken, rice, vegetables. We smoked, drank, told stupid stories. We didn't talk about the watchers. The sun dropped behind the trees, leaving long blue shadows in the valley. The fire crackled. Colin fell out of his camp chair laughing at one of his own jokes. For a while, it felt normal. Then the laughter came. Not ours, someone else's. It drifted in from the darkness, soft at first, then louder, as if whoever it belonged to was circling us. The hair on my neck prickled. Megan stiffened beside me. Anne whispered, "Colin, that wasn't you, right?" He immediately snapped sober. "No." I grabbed the gun, stomped out of the tent, and fired 3 shots into the air. My voice cracked as I shouted, "Back off, I'm armed." The laughter stopped. Then, very faintly, we heard a clicking sound, almost like 2 stones tapping together. Click, 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 click. A pattern. We moved our tents closer together, all 4 of us sleeping in paranoid silence. Someone stayed awake at all times, rotating in half-hour shifts. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning we debated going home, but 18-year-olds are stupid in very specific ways. Pride won. We packed up and hiked toward a different part of the trail, closer to the exits, we said. Around noon, we ran into a group of older hikers. We told them we'd seen people in the woods acting creepy. Their faces went pale. "You kids shouldn't stay another night," one of them said quietly. "This area gets strange traffic sometimes." We didn't take the hint. By late afternoon, we found another decent campsite roughly 3 miles from the trailhead. We built a fire, made dinner, steak and potatoes this time, and let the intoxicants pull our nerves loose. We joked. We tried to reclaim the trip. Around midnight, I woke up needing to pee. I unzipped the tent quietly so Megan wouldn't stir, grabbed the gun, and stepped out into the cold. The forest was dead silent. No breeze, no owls. Even the creek felt muted. I walked maybe 20 feet away and relieved myself, gun in my left hand, headlamp illuminating the frost-glittered leaves. Crunch. I whipped around. Another crunch, closer. I raised the headlamp. A man stood at the edge of the light. The same man Anne had seen the day before. Dirty black hair hanging in greasy ropes. Clothes shredded. Lanky body that looked too thin to hold up his long limbs. His eyes were sunken, wild. And in his right hand, hanging low, was a machete. He didn't hesitate. He charged. I screamed and emptied the gun at him, firing as fast as I could. The muzzle flashes shattered the darkness. His scream tore through the trees, a raw animal howl, and I saw him fall, collapsing into the brush. I ran back to camp, shouting for everyone to get up. Megan came out terrified. Colin and Anne stumbled out, wide-eyed. "We're leaving. Now." We didn't pack the tents. We didn't grab anything we didn't absolutely need. We stuffed what we could into our bags and sprinted. 3 miles of pure terror, checking behind us every few seconds. The forest felt alive around us, branches cracking, distant clicks echoing through the dark, like stones tapping in that same code from before. We reached the parking lot in under an hour. Locked the car, covered the windows. Tried to sleep. I didn't. At dawn, we left immediately. We never called the police. Part of me didn't want to explain firing every shot in my dad's gun. Part of me didn't want to hear a detective say, "We didn't find anything." But the biggest part? I was terrified they'd tell me they did find something. Or someone. Someone tall, someone thin. Someone who was never supposed to be human in the first place. It's been years. I still hike. Carefully. But sometimes when I'm deep in the woods and the trees get too quiet, I hear faint clicking in the distance. Click, 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 click. And I think of her, watching from between the trees. I've worked in and around national forests for almost 20 years, long enough to know that most things people call mysterious in the woods have explanations. Wind, animals, bad navigation, panic. I've responded to hundreds of calls, missing hikers, bear encounters, illegal campsites, even the occasional delusional survivalist who thought the government was beaming thoughts into his tent. But every ranger, every real one, keeps a second set of notes. A private logbook. The things we don't file. The things we don't talk about. The things we don't want to believe, but can't ignore. This is mine. I only started comparing the entries after a particular call-out 2 springs ago, but the pattern stretches back years, across states, across forests, across incidents that should have nothing to do with each other, until they did. My first entry of note is from 2011, West Virginia. A hiker reported a deranged man with an axe chopping at a fallen log over a gorge. The hiker had crossed moments earlier and claimed the man tried to trap him on the far side. When I got there the next morning, the log was still intact enough to see the fresh cuts. Axle-deep blows, spaced evenly, I wrote in the official report. Likely dispute between hikers.
footprints.
Area monitored
You're
no
going
further
into the
action.
woods.
But my personal note was different. Cuts to uniform, not random. Symbol carved on nearby tree. Circle with intersecting line. Never seen before. At the time, I chalked it up to vandalism. That symbol would return again and again. The next case came 3 years later, northern Minnesota. A young man stumbled out of the wilderness after dark, babbling about wolves that ran from something and a black wall of smoke in a clearing. I was called to search the area in case there was a fire hazard. When I found the clearing, there was no smoke, no fire, no wolves, but the stones. The fire ring he'd described wasn't a casual ring at all. The rocks were stacked in delicate spires, each balancing unnaturally on its neighbor. The slightest tremor should have toppled them, yet they stood still as glass. I recorded the official version. Investigated area. Found remains of an old, vandalized campsite. No active threats. My personal note read, symbols carved on trees. Fresh. Print in mud human. Barefoot. Long stride. Stones arranged intentionally. Felt watched. Stayed only 6 minutes. I still remember the feeling. The air heavy, silent, as if sound itself avoided that place. Then came Arkansas. A pair of unattended tents were reported near a remote stretch of trail. The caller claimed they saw blood droplets, bullet casings, and a tall woman standing on a ridge. I was the nearest responder. I hiked up expecting teenagers playing army games. The tents were real. One was collapsed. The other still had 2 sleeping bags zipped together. A half-cooked meal sat in a pot beside the fire pit, stone cold. There were boot prints, 4 sets leading downhill. There were also droplets of blood on one of the tent flaps, though not enough to indicate a serious injury. I followed the footprints for maybe a quarter mile before losing them in the creek bed. What bothered me wasn't the tents, or the blood, or the casings. It was the marker. Someone had taken one of the official trail signs, heavy solid wood, and flipped it upside down. Holes had been drilled into it, forming the same intersecting circle symbol I'd seen in Minnesota and West Virginia. The edges of the drill marks were burned, as if someone had branded the symbol into the sign. I reported none of that. I just wrote, possibly abandoned campsite. No signs of foul play. Gear left for retrieval. But in my private log I added, third state. Same symbol, same feeling. After that, I started reading back through my old notebooks more carefully. I noticed things I'd forgotten, or maybe chosen to forget. A complaint from 2014. Men cutting trees near ravine. A missing camper from 2015 found wandering with no memory of the last hour before sunset. Reports from hunters about a woman tall as a doorway walking in the timber. A wildlife tracker refusing to enter a glade because the animals wouldn't cross the line. And always, always that symbol. Sometimes etched deep in bark, sometimes drawn in charcoal on rocks, sometimes burned into wood, a circle with a slash, or a slash with a circle, sometimes jagged, sometimes neat, always familiar. 2 springs ago was when everything clicked, at least enough for me to be afraid. The call came from a part of the forest that shouldn't have had hikers at all. No official trails, no campsites, just raw country where only rangers, biologists, and very determined idiots ever go. The dispatcher said the caller sounded panicked, disoriented. They mentioned people watching from the trees, a log bridge, screaming. I hiked out there alone. Near the ravine, I found the fallen log narrow, worn smooth, spanning a drop that would easily twist an ankle or break a leg. On the far side, I found fresh axe marks. Not random, patterned, deliberate. A rusted charm lay in the dirt, half buried, a circle intersected by a crooked line. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I scanned the opposite bank. For a long moment, it looked empty. Then I saw it a figure deeper in the trees, still as a shadow, watching me. Impossible to gauge height or build. When I blinked, it was gone. I stayed only long enough to feel the first pulse of dread in my throat. Then I turned back. My watch buzzed. 3:17 p.m. It had buzzed at exactly that time during 2 previous calls. One in Minnesota, one in Arkansas. At first, I'd thought it was coincidence. Now, I wasn't so sure. Back at the station, I began typing an official report. But as I typed, my document started auto-correcting phrases I hadn't misspelled. I'd write, "Area seems to have been recently disturbed by Potch," and it would change to, "You shouldn't be here." I deleted the line, typed slower, careful. It happened again, and again. I blamed a glitch. Maybe a sticky key. Maybe I was tired. But when I went home that night and opened my personal logbook, the last page held a sentence I did not write. It doesn't like being noticed. The handwriting was almost mine, but the slant was wrong. The spacing, the rhythm of the strokes, and below it, a tiny drawing of the symbol, carved, not written. Yesterday, I was called to check a remote trailhead before dawn. Reports of disturbed trees. I drove out alone, ignoring the sick weight in my stomach. When I stepped out of the truck, the air was cold and still. On the first tree beside the lot, freshly carved into the bark, was that symbol, crisp grooves, sap still weeping. Someone or something wanted me to see it. I should have driven away, called it in, let someone else handle it. Instead, I found myself holding my logbook, thumb resting on that carved entry, the forest stretching silent and dark in front of me. And for the first time in 20 years, the woods felt less like a place I worked in, and more like a place that had been watching me watch it. I closed the book, put it in my pack. Then I walked forward into the trees. Not because I'm brave, but because something in me whispered that it was already too late to back out. The trail behind me felt narrower, the air heavier, the light dimmer, and somewhere deep between the trunks, I thought I heard clicking. Click, 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 click. Or maybe that was my heartbeat. Either way, I didn't turn back. I've always loved horror stories, the online ones. The kind people swear are true, but, deep down, were just written by someone who wanted to see their post go viral. I grew up on creepypastas, YouTube narrations, forum threads about things only hikers know, all of it. So when I started hearing these stories pop up over and over about symbols carved into trees, cult-like campsites, people in the woods who felt wrong, wolves running from something unseen, I dismissed them as recycled folklore. Then I started noticing something stranger. Different storytellers, across different states, describing the same symbol, a circle with a jagged line cutting through it. Some called it a hunter's mark. Others said it was a warning. A few claimed it was a boundary marker, something you weren't supposed to cross. Every story had it, every forest had it, and every story had a moment somewhere between the build-up and the escape, when the storyteller glanced at their watch or phone, and it read 3:17. AM or PM didn't seem to matter. At first I thought it was a coincidence. Then I thought it was an inside joke. But after the 10th, then the 15th version of the same symbol, plus same time, plus same inexplicable dread, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, something was going on. Not something supernatural. I didn't believe in that. Something cultural, social, a hidden group maybe. Backwoods cults. Isolated communities enforcing boundary lines. Outsiders weren't meant to cross. Something explainable. Something I could document. Something that might get me the kind of attention I'd always wanted online. So, naturally, I decided to investigate. The trail system I chose was a smaller one, not a national park, just a county forest preserve known mostly to locals. The place was rumored on a subreddit to contain the clearing. The comments were vague, no coordinates, just descriptions that matched all the familiar details. The stacked stones, the hanging bones, the symbols. Even better, it was only a 3-hour drive away. I arrived late afternoon. The parking lot was half full, but the woods felt deserted. No voices, no dogs, no crunching of gravel, just wind sliding through bare branches and the soft metallic ping of my cooling car engine. A man stood near the trail map board as I locked my doors. He didn't move, didn't look up, just stared at the map like he'd forgotten how to read. I almost said hello, but held back. When I glanced back a few seconds later, he was gone, like he had never been there. I should have left then, but I didn't. Because the sun was low, and the woods were quiet, and my adrenaline was high enough to drown out instinct. The trail was easy at first. Leaves scattered across the dirt, branches cracking softly overhead. The air smelled like cold earth and damp bark, but the deeper I went, the stranger things became. I started seeing carvings. The first was faint, a circle scratched into a birch with a shaky hand. The second was cleaner, deeper. The third had been carved so hard the bark had split open and bled sap down the trunk. All three had the same shape, a circle intersected by a crooked line. My heartbeat quickened, not with fear but excitement. I'd expected hours of searching. Instead, the forest was practically guiding me, marking the way. I took pictures, proud of myself, proud of the documentation I was collecting. Actual proof that the online stories weren't just copy-paste fiction. Proof that there was a real pattern here. Then I checked my phone clock. 3:17 p.m. I didn't want to admit how fast my stomach dropped. I laughed out loud, a shaky little sound lost in the branches. Coincidence, I told myself. Has to be. My brain started fixating on the threads I'd read, how often the time popped up, how many people claimed it meant something. I took a breath, locked my phone, and kept going. The forest got quieter. Wind died. Birds stopped. The trail narrowed until it was barely visible. Eventually, it vanished entirely, and I walked between trunks without any guidance except the strange certainty that I was heading the right way. Every few minutes, I heard rustling behind me. Not constant, not heavy, just matching my pace. I didn't look. Not yet. The clearing announced itself before I saw it. The air changed colder, tighter, like walking into an unventilated attic. Light dimmed, even though the sun was still above the trees. My skin prickled, and something in my chest tightened, the same way it does before a panic attack. But I pushed forward, through a thick screen of brush, and stepped out into an open space.
Where did they come from?
It was exactly like the stories described. A collapsed fire ring in the center, but the stones weren't arranged normally. They were stacked like miniature towers, leaning, spiraling. Impossible. Balanced so precisely, it made my teeth hurt to look at them. Objects hung from branches on leather cords, bone shapes twisted into patterns, rusted metal fragments bent into symbols that mirrored the ones carved on trunks, strings of feathers and old keys, a piece of jewelry that looked like a locket, a laminated scrap of paper fluttered against a low branch. Curious, I grabbed it.
No.
It was a missing person flyer, or part of one. The photograph had been torn exactly through the eyes. My skin crawled. I let the paper go and stepped closer to the center, where the temperature felt even colder. That's when I noticed it. A column of smoke hanging in the air like a sheet of dark glass. Not rising, not drifting, just suspended at head height. Thin, black, reflective. I leaned in. At first, I saw only my own reflection warped, slowed, like I was being watched from underwater. Then, the image shifted, and I saw the parking lot. Not now, but at night. Completely dark, only my car visible. The lot looked empty, except for tall, thin shapes moving between the shadows of the other cars. My breath hitched. I stepped back. The smoke rippled as if something on the other side had exhaled. Then came the whisper. Not loud, not threatening, not even unfamiliar. Everyone has that one experience sooner or later. My blood iced, because the voice wasn't coming from behind me, or beside me. It was coming from inside my own throat. The same tone, the same cadence. My own voice repeating something I'd read in one of the online stories. A dad comforting his shaken son. I stumbled back another step. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A 3:17. I wanted to run. I should have run, but the forest behind me felt darker now. Wider. Wrong. And something deep in me whispered that if I turned my back on the clearing, something would step into the path behind me. So I did the stupid thing. I lifted my phone to record. The camera app opened, glitched, and then showed a live view, not of the clearing, but of a ring of figures around me. All facing inward, all unmoving. Some short, some tall, one towering, bending at the waist like it was studying me. Each wore something with that same intersecting circle symbol. A charm, a patch, a scar carved into skin. I spun in place. The clearing was empty. The camera showed them still. Closer now. I heard rustling again. Behind me, to my left, to my right. I bolted. Branches whipped my face. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. The forest seemed to twist around me, paths curving where no path had been. Trees shifting closer. Obstacles appearing just before my feet. Something chased me. Not loudly, not crashing after me, but I felt it behind me, moving faster than I did, keeping pace, hurting me, just like the stories. I burst out of the woods at dusk, stumbling into the parking lot. Only 3 cars remained. Mine was the closest. I fumbled the keys, dove inside, locked the doors, started the engine with shaking hands. Something moved in my rearview mirror. Tall, thin, wrong. I floored it. Drove home in near darkness, headlights barely cutting the road. When I got home, I watched the recording. It was 10 seconds long. It showed only one thing. A still frame of that suspended column of black smoke. Timestamp, 3:17 a.m., hours after I'd already left the forest. And the final second of audio, my voice whispering, "I know these woods a lot better than you do, but I have never said those words in my life."